G'day, welcome back to the channel. Time for some more news. Time for another rant, because I know you love the rants. Well, news first of all, a Boeing 737 MAX 8 has crashed in Africa with the death of more than 150 people. And as a result, a number of airlines around the world are withdrawing these aircraft from service, because you recall there was an earlier crash where one of these aircraft basically had I think it was an attitude sensor or an airspeed sensor or something, failure, and it crashed into the ocean. Lion Air, and all were lost in that crash. So yeah, there could be a problem, but we don't know. It's too early to say. However, once again, we have to point out that there were no drones involved, and that there are far greater dangers to airline pilots and passengers than drones. And just to make that point, I see that someone is suing the pilot of an aircraft that crashed into a Ferris wheel. Light aircraft crashed into a Ferris wheel. I think, was it Australia? Because of the trauma that they suffered. So yeah, we've got aeroplanes crashing all over the place, but not because of drones. And I'm going to make that point now. This is the ranty bit. I've been going through the Civil Aviation Authority in New Zealand through their fatality accident reports, and there's becoming a very strong theme apparent through these reports. Apart from a crash on takeoff where an aircraft lost power, and apart from a couple of hang glider incidents, virtually all of the recent reports have included one common factor. That's pilots flying too low, below the legally prescribed minimum of 500 feet above ground level. There's three incidents I'll go through at the moment just to point out to you, but this is a common theme. It's like, this is one of the problems. When you fly low in a manned aircraft, you lose your options. The time you have to react to something like a mechanical failure or something is much reduced. Your choice of landing options, if you have an engine failure, is much reduced. And even the time required to do something as simple as recover from a stall is reduced. And below 500 feet, well, you get out of options really quick. So that's why there are minimum altitudes prescribed in the regulations. But pilots do not seem to be following these, at least not in New Zealand. So there have been 5 deaths in the last 3 years caused by pilots flying, or where flying too low has been a major factor in the cause of the crash. So we've got the Civil Aviation knocking on at drone flyers and RC flyers. You've got to fly below 400 feet because it's safe then, because the pilots are 500 and above. Well, I'm sorry, but they're not. They're just not. And if you look through some of my previous rants, look at the comments that people have left. Overwhelmingly, model flyers and people are noticing that manned aviation is not obeying the rules. There are so many cases where aircraft are flying below the mandated minimum, and that is a danger not only to people who are legally and safely flying models and drones, but also to the pilots and passengers in those aircraft, as we'll see from the accident reports. Now, I'm just going to go through briefly some of the reports that I noted here. The most recent one was actually a RANS S6E5 Coyote, and under the key factors heading in the accident report, the CAA state the pilot was manoeuvring the aircraft below the minimum altitude for VFR flight. So they've acknowledged that. And in the conclusions they say, at the time of the accident, the pilot was flying below the prescribed minimum height of 500 feet. So I think it's very clear that being below 500 feet was a significant cause. And as you can see, the aircraft was a total loss. 2 people died on that aircraft. So, what do you do? And in the safety actions, it says non-adherence to minimum safety heights. This is what CAA are aware of. They're going to be pushing this, telling pilots, you've got to stay above the minimum altitude. Now, one thing I've noticed with CAA, and it's a bit of a criticism, I've got to say, is that they acknowledge a lot of things, but they rarely act on them. Over 2 years ago, I said to CAA, why don't you put a QR code in the airports so that when people get off a plane and they've got a drone in their baggage, they can scan the QR code, download all the relevant regulations and safety information to their smartphone, and then they can peruse it at their leisure. And CAA acknowledged that is a very good idea. Over 2 years ago, still nothing's happened. They still haven't put up that QR code poster. They've put videos on YouTube, and this is how many views they get. The CAA are out of touch with the best way to promulgate their regulations. They acknowledge that people like myself have really good ideas and we know the best way to do it, but then they don't do anything. And it's the same here. We've got CAA acknowledging that they need to do more about telling pilots to stay above the minimum mandated height, but they're not really doing it. I haven't seen any action. It says here safety actions, but there's no follow-up, there's no follow-through, okay? So that was the Rand's Coyote. That was on the 2nd of April 2017, 2 fatalities. Let's look at the one before that. That was a Benson B8 gyroplane where 1 person died. And just to quote from the CAA Fatality Incident Report, it says, the inexperienced pilot was conducting flying manoeuvres outside his capability and well below the prescribed minimum heights. So there we go again, below the prescribed heights. It also says pilots must comply with civil aviation rules for minimum heights. Here we go. And then it says the key findings, the pilot was flying below the prescribed minimum height. So flying below 500 feet was a very significant factor in this crash where 1 person died. And this was on the 9th of April 2017. So it was only a couple of years ago this guy died because his gyroplane crashed into the ground. If he'd had more altitude, he would have had more options, more opportunity to recover from the manoeuvre which caused this crash. And now I'm going to talk about another one. I've talked about this one before. This was the top dressing pilot and loader operator who were flying to a job and crashed into some power lines. It was an Aerospace, a Pacific Aerospace 750XL, and this was in December 2016. And there were 2 fatalities. 2 people died in this crash. And from the report, it says that they hit power lines 200 feet above the ground, and several human factors likely influenced the pilot's decision-making and risk perception, leading to the decision to change the original plan and deviate from the minimum heights as stipulated by CAR 91.311. What is CAR 91.311? Well, that's the Civil Aviation Regulation, right? So I'll read it out to you. It says the minimum heights for VFR flights, VFR visual flight rules. That's when you're flying by looking out the window, not solely on instruments. So the minimum heights for VFR flights states a pilot must not fly at a height of less than 500 feet above the surface or at a height of less than 500 feet above any obstacle, person, vehicle, vessel or structure that is within a horizontal radius of 150 metres from the point immediately below the craft. So basically the pilot in this top dressing aircraft broke that rule and 2 people died as a result. So 3 of the latest incidents that, where people have died because flying too low, been a major factor in their death. So you would think CAA would be all over this, wouldn't they? I mean, there'd be bulletins going out and be constant hammering at pilots, do not fly below the mandated minimum. But no, instead we get, do not fly your drone near airports, do not fly your drone here, do not do this with your drone. No, let's ask ourselves and let's remind ourselves of the one question that everybody should be asking. How many people have died as a result of the recreational use of multi-rotor drones? None. How many people have died in the last 3 years as a result of aircraft flying below the prescribed minimums? Well, here's 5 for a start. So CAA, a word in your ear, let's look at the real problems, the problems that are costing lives before we start getting too carried away with the perceived problems that in the entire history of mankind on this planet, in the entire universe, have never caused 1 death. And I'm talking about the recreational use of multi-rotor drones. So let's get it should all be based on risk, shouldn't it? We need to look at the risk when we're making up regulations. So the risk is very clear. Flying too low in a manned aircraft is a huge risk and does result in frequent loss of life. Flying a drone recreationally, however you fly it, wherever you fly it, has never caused a single death anywhere in the world in the entire history of mankind. So where do you think the real risk is? Of course, it's manned aviation. It's manned aviation flying too low. And the thing that really worries me is that this low flying is happening on such a frequent basis now that, yes, eventually an aircraft will collide with a drone and people may die. But I can almost guarantee you that if/when that happens, the aircraft will be flying below the mandated minimums. So the drone operator will be the one who goes to court, gets imprisoned or whatever it may be, because he was flying his drone legally below 400 feet, trying to follow all the rules, and a manned aircraft comes through flying below the mandated minimums and collides with the drone. So everything is skewed in favour of manned aviation. It has to change. This has to change. Manned aviation has to start taking responsibility for the occasions when it breaks the regulations and the increasing frequency with which this is costing human lives. Now this brings me to one of the worst parts of New Zealand's drone regulations. In New Zealand, if you want to fly a drone or a model aircraft, you must have the permission of the owner or occupier of the property over which you're flying. You can't just go out and find a nice green paddock in the middle of nowhere or a little leafy glen in the middle of nowhere and fly your model aircraft or your drone or your mini quad because it's against the law. It's against the aviation regulations. And I've queried CAA, why is this? Why can we not fly a tiny little toy over an empty grassy field in the middle of nowhere without the permission of the property owner? And the response I got at the time from CAA was, because it's too dangerous because you won't know what all the risks are, what all the potential dangers are for flying over there. And my response is, do I need to know? Really, seriously? What if my little toy plane crashes in that grassy field? Who's going to get hurt? Nobody. There's no risk to person and there's no risk to property because in an empty grassy field, there is no property. So this is a ridiculous restriction on, and it's actually crippled the hobby to quite a degree because people used to be able to go out, find an empty field, go and fly a model. Yeah. And if anyone had a problem, they could tell you move along, but it wasn't against the law. It wasn't a breach of regulations. And I could take my little mini quad down and fly it under the trees in a little leafy glen somewhere. And as long as I wasn't annoying people, no problem. Now it's illegal unless I get the permission of the property owner. We have tourists coming to New Zealand with their drones. They cannot fly to get all the pictures in all the good places where there's lovely scenery and landscapes because for a start, they don't know who owns that piece of property. It could be public land, it could be private land. How do you get the permission? And even if they knew who owned it, how would you contact these people? And how would you get, like, you roll up to a nice scenic outlook and you think, oh, I'd love to get a picture of this with my drone. You might only be there for 10 minutes. You don't have time to organise that permission. And again, speaking of CAA and their inaction, I've spoken to CAA and said, look, you've got places around New Zealand where you've got no drones allowed, big signs, no drones. Where are the places that say, fly your drone here? Why don't we have places strategically placed at scenic locations where people can see, oh, here's a sign. It says I can fly my drones so long as I don't go above 400 feet and so long as I stay within the regulations, I can fly my drone here. And then people will not be flying in the wrong places. They will be flying in the places that have been set aside for that. So if they want to get a lovely picture of this mountain or this stream or this lake, they'll know exactly where they can do it legally. And CAA said, that's a brilliant idea. Have they done it? No. So this is it. CAA are all talk and no action. Now this may be because they don't have resources, but I originally thought that. I'm starting to think less of that now. I just think that maybe they can't be bothered. Maybe they realise that despite all the hype and hysteria, drones really just aren't the risk that they're portrayed to be. So we don't need to take action on QR codes at airports or signs saying where you can fly your drones because really drones have never killed anybody, so they're not the risk that people claim they are. So thanks for that, CAA. You have shown by your actions that even you believe drones are such a trivial risk that it's not worth pursuing any of the positive ideas, positive suggestions I've made to you over the years. Excellent. But back to that property permission thing now. I can't fly legally my little toy drone over an empty grassy field in the middle of nowhere because I might not know that there's a fence wire somewhere. I might hit it and the drone might fall in the grass. Yeah, it's fine. But then why is it that we have this? Look at these. Look, we have aircraft, manned aircraft, falling into empty grassy fields in the middle of nowhere and killing people, killing the people on board. These aircraft have not required to get the permission of the property owner, but if a gyrocopter falls out of the sky, then if there's anything below it, that will get damaged, or if it's a person, they'll get killed. If a microlight falls out of the sky and anything beneath is in danger, if my tiny quadcopter or my little foam plane falls out of the sky, nobody's endangered. So CAA, why do you make a rule which prohibits low-risk activity, yet you allow high-risk activity that costs people's lives every year? Answer me that. I want to know. And CAA, if you're not prepared to follow through on some of these good ideas, which are safety-focused, then please admit that drones are not the risk they're portrayed to be, and please acknowledge that this means you can back off on some of these ridiculous regulations like the property permission one. Absolutely not essential at all, and it's actually hurting our hobby, the hobby from which manned aviators come. Most people that fly manned aviation have started with model aircraft. If people can't fly their models anywhere because there's so much red tape involved in just getting permission, then aviation will also suffer. Not just the hobby, but aviation will also suffer because there'll be no young people brought up on models wanting to become pilots. No, can't be bothered. No, not interested. And I've discussed this in other videos. So there we go, CAA. Listen to that, please. Follow through on that. So there we go. Another rant and a little news. Thanks for watching. Now, if you've got comments, questions, put them in the usual place. Don't forget, tell your friends about the videos. I'll put these in a playlist, the rants maybe in a playlist, so it's easier for people to find them and just, watch them instead of the other stuff in case it doesn't interest them. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe because you really should. Thumbs up, all that sort of stuff, blah, blah. Click the bell. You know what it is. You know the routine. You've seen it on every video on YouTube just about. And I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time soon on the XJet channel. Bye for now.